Let me tell you about Marcus Rodriguez, or Tank as his construction crew called him, which should give you a pretty good idea of his problem-solving approach to life. Tank was having what you might call a really bad week. It started when he got blackout drunk at a space station bar, and ended when he woke up in shackles, apparently having punched Ambassador Zeal of the Centauri Diplomatic Corps in what witnesses described as a haymaker that could have cracked a moon. Now, Tank wasn't a violent guy. He was just a construction worker from Detroit who'd signed up for off-world jobs because the pay was decent and Earth was getting crowded. But when some six-armed, purple-skinned diplomat started lecturing him about human primitive aggression, while Tank was just trying to drink his sorrows away after his girlfriend left him, well, diplomacy wasn't really Tank's strong suit. So, Tank said to his court-appointed lawyer, a nervous slug thing that kept leaving trails on the paperwork, "What's the damage? Community service? Anger management classes?" The slug made a sound like someone stepping on wet lettuce. "Mr. Rodriguez, you assaulted a high-ranking Centauri official during peace negotiations. The Galactic Council has decided to make an example of your species' violent tendencies." Meaning what, exactly? Pandemonium Station. Tank had never heard of it, but judging by the way everyone in the courtroom suddenly went quiet and started backing away from him, it wasn't exactly a vacation resort. Turns out, Pandemonium Station was what happened when the galaxy's various species got together and decided they needed somewhere to put the beings they never wanted to see again. Not just criminals, mind you. Political prisoners, genetic anomalies, people who'd invented new ways to commit war crimes, and that one guy who'd somehow figured out how to weaponize elevator music. The station itself looked like someone had taken a space station, put it through a blender, then tried to reassemble it while blindfolded and possibly intoxicated. It spun slowly in the void, broadcasting a single message on all frequencies: "Abandon hope, all ye who enter here." No, seriously. We're not being dramatic. The cafeteria alone will crush your soul. Tank's transport ship docked with all the enthusiasm of a funeral procession. The other passengers, a collection of beings that looked like they'd been designed by committee during a particularly bad acid trip, kept staring at him with expressions ranging from curiosity to outright pity. "First time at Pandemonium?" asked a creature that looked like a walking pile of crystals with anger management issues. "Yeah," Tank replied. "You?" 15th. Tank decided not to ask what that meant. The docking bay was exactly what you'd expect from a place called Pandemonium Station. Dimly lit, vaguely threatening, and smelling like despair with hints of industrial disinfectant. Tank was processed by a series of increasingly bored bureaucrats, each one seeming more dead inside than the last. Finally, he was brought before Warden Klaxon, and Tank had to admit, the universe had a sense of humor. Klaxon looked like what would happen if a praying mantis had a midlife crisis and decided to become middle management. 6 feet tall, bright green, with compound eyes that seemed to see everything and judge it all as inadequate paperwork. "Marcus Rodriguez," Klaxon said, consulting a datapad with the intensity of someone reading their own death certificate. "Human. Sentenced to indefinite detention for assault on a diplomatic official. Says, here you have construction experience." "Yeah, that's right." "Excellent. The waste recycling system needs repairs. You'll be working 12-hour shifts starting immediately. Any questions?" Tank had about 1,000 questions, but settled on, "What's the food like?" Klaxon's mandibles clicked in what might have been amusement. "Mr. Rodriguez, this is Pandemonium Station. We don't have food. We have nutritional paste dispensed at regulated intervals to prevent death. The flavor has been described as aggressively disappointing." And that's how Tank found himself assigned to cell block 7, sharing a 10 by 10 space with something that introduced itself as Goop. Goop was, as advertised, a sentient blob of what looked like green jello with delusions of grandeur. "Welcome to paradise," Goop said in a voice like someone gargling gravel. "I'm serving 3 consecutive life sentences for philosophical terrorism. What's your story? Tank stared at his new roommate. Philosophical terrorism? I convinced an entire planet that their existence might be meaningless. Apparently that's illegal in 17 systems. Who knew? Goop rippled with what might have been a shrug. So, what brings you to our little slice of purgatory? Tank sank onto his bunk, which was about as comfortable as sleeping on a pile of regrets. I punched a diplomat. Ooh, assault on a government official. Classic. Was it worth it? Tank thought about it. Ambassador Gilles had been pontificating about human inferiority while Tank was just trying to drink away the memory of finding his girlfriend in bed with his best friend. The punch had felt pretty good at the time. Yeah, Tank said. I think it was. Goop made a sound like approval. I like you already, human. You're going to hate it here. Tank's first week at Pandemonium Station was like attending a master class in creative misery. The place operated on what Klaxon proudly called structured despair, which was basically a fancy way of saying they'd figured out how to make every moment of existence as soul-crushingly boring as possible, while still technically keeping everyone alive. The daily routine was a thing of beauty if you appreciated bureaucratic sadism. Wake-up call at 0600 hours via sonic blast that sounded like a dying whale. Nutritional paste dispensing at 0630, which gave you exactly 4 minutes to consume something that tasted like cardboard soaked in regret. Then 12 hours of whatever mind-numbing labor they'd assigned you, followed by recreational time in the common area, where recreation apparently meant sitting around staring at walls and contemplating your life choices. Tank learned about the prison hierarchy pretty quickly. At the bottom were the small-time offenders, beings who'd committed crimes like tax evasion or illegal parking on sacred ground. They mostly kept to themselves and spent their time writing complaints to the Galactic Civil Rights Commission that no one would ever read. Then you had the middle tier, the career criminals who'd made a living out of various illegal enterprises. They formed gangs based on species, territory, or sometimes just shared appreciation for specific types of violence. Tank met several of them during his first few days. There was Captain Boom Boom, a former space pirate who looked like someone had crossbred an octopus with a hand grenade. He'd gotten his nickname from his tendency to solve problems with explosives and his habit of making explosion sound effects whenever he talked. Boom Boom used to run the Nebula Express, he told Tank during their first conversation. Fastest ship in the Outer Rim. Boom. Then the Galactic Navy got lucky. Ka Piao. Then there was Whispers, a telepathic con artist from the Mentari system who could make you believe anything if you weren't careful. She looked vaguely humanoid, but with silver skin and eyes like black holes. Don't worry, she told Tank, I can't actually read your thoughts without permission. It's considered rude. But I can tell you're thinking about how weird this place is, and you're right. At the top of the food chain was Razor, a crystalline being from the Quartzian Confederacy who'd been sent to Pandemonium for what the files diplomatically termed excessive enthusiasm in conflict resolution. Razor looked like someone had taught a pile of broken glass how to walk upright and hold grudges. He controlled most of the black market trade in the prison, which mainly consisted of slightly less terrible versions of the nutritional paste and improvised weapons. Human. Razor said during Tank's first encounter with him, his voice sounding like someone dragging fingernails across a chalkboard. I hear you're new. Let me explain how things work here. You stay out of my way, you might survive your sentence. You cross me, and I'll use your bones to pick my teeth. Tank, who'd spent years dealing with difficult contractors and union bosses, just nodded. Got it. Stay in my lane, don't cause trouble. Smart human, Razor replied, apparently satisfied. The recreational activities were where Pandemonium Station really showed its commitment to psychological warfare. There was the gymnasium, which consisted of a room full of exercise equipment that had been deliberately designed to be as unsatisfying as possible. The weights were too light, the running machines went too slow, and the punching bags were filled with something that made a disappointing poof sound when you hit them. There was also the library, stocked with the galaxy's most boring books. Tank spent an hour trying to read administrative procedures of the Centauri Tax Bureau, revised edition before giving up and concluding that it might actually be a form of torture disguised as literature. But the real genius was the common area, where inmates were encouraged to socialize. The problem was, nobody had anything interesting to talk about. After years of eating the same terrible food, doing the same mind-numbing work, and staring at the same gray walls, most inmates had been reduced to conversations that went something like, "How's your nutritional paste?" "Terrible, mine too." "Yep." Tank watched this social wasteland for several days, and being a problem solver by nature, he started thinking about solutions. The issue wasn't that these beings were inherently boring. Razor had stories about his conquests, Captain Boom Boom had obviously lived through some spectacular adventures, and even Goop had philosophical insights that were actually pretty interesting once you got past the whole convinced a planet to have an existential crisis thing. The problem was that nobody had anything new to talk about. They'd all heard each other's stories 100 times. What they needed was new content, fresh material, something to break the cycle of mundane despair. That's when Tank made his first mistake. During his second week, he approached Klaxon during the Warden's daily inspection. "Warden," Tank said, "I've been thinking about the recreational activities." Klaxon's compound eyes swiveled toward him with the mechanical precision of a security camera. "Have you, Mr. Rodriguez?" "Well, sir, I noticed the inmates seem pretty bored." "Bored inmates tend to cause trouble, right? Maybe if we gave them something more engaging to do during recreational time, it might reduce tensions." Klaxon's mandibles clicked thoughtfully. "Are you suggesting that our carefully designed rehabilitation program is insufficient, Mr. Rodriguez?" Tank realized he was walking into a trap, but his mouth was already moving. "Not insufficient, sir. Maybe just room for improvement?" "Room for improvement," Klaxon repeated slowly. "Mr. Rodriguez, do you know why this facility is called Pandemonium Station?" "No, sir." "Because it's designed to be pandemonium. Controlled pandemonium. The boredom, the despair, the mind-numbing routine, it's all intentional. These beings are here because they disrupted the natural order of civilized society. Our job is to make sure they never want to do it again." Tank nodded like he understood, but internally he was thinking that maybe the Galactic Council's approach to criminal justice could use some work. "However," Klaxon continued, "since you seem so concerned about recreational activities, perhaps some time in solitary confinement will help you appreciate the current system." And that's how Tank spent his third week at Pandemonium Station, locked in a box the size of a coffin, with nothing to do but think about his situation. Which, as it turned out, was exactly what he needed. Solitary confinement at Pandemonium Station was like being buried alive, except more boring. Tank spent 7 days in a cell barely big enough to lie down in, with nothing but his thoughts and a timer that counted down how many hours he had left. The walls were smooth metal, the lighting was a dim amber that made everything look vaguely post-apocalyptic, and the only sound was the distant hum of the station's life support systems. Most inmates came out of solitary broken, desperate to conform to whatever rules would keep them from going back. Tank came out with an idea. See, while he was lying there with nothing to do, Tank started thinking about entertainment, specifically about how humans entertained themselves versus how these aliens did it. The prison library was full of technical manuals and historical documents, but where were the stories? Where were the movies, the songs, the books that people actually wanted to experience? Then it hit him. They didn't have any. These aliens, for all their advanced technology and galactic civilizations, seemed to have missed the concept of fiction entirely. No wonder they were all going insane from boredom. They had nothing to escape into except more gray reality. When Tank got back to his cell, Goop was waiting with what passed for concern among sentient blob creatures. "Tank, my philosophically challenged friend, you look like you've had a revelation." "Goop," Tank said, settling onto his bunk. What do your people do for fun? Fun? Goop rippled with confusion. We contemplate the meaninglessness of existence and debate the nature of reality. Why? No, I mean fun. Entertainment. Stories. And make-believe. Make-believe? Tank stared at his cellmate. You don't have fiction, do you? Movies? Books? Stories about things that didn't actually happen. Why would anyone create stories about things that didn't happen? Goop asked. Wouldn't that be lying? This was when Tank realized that humanity might have accidentally stumbled onto something the rest of the galaxy was missing. He spent the next hour trying to explain the concept of movies to Goop, starting with the basics. Okay, so imagine there's this guy, right? And he's just a regular guy, maybe a farmer or something. But then something happens. Some bad guys threaten his family or his planet or whatever, and he has to go on this big adventure to save everyone. But did this actually happen? No, it's made up. But you watch it because you want to see if he succeeds. Goop was silent for a long moment. So you observe fictional events for entertainment purposes? Yeah, exactly. And humans create these fictional scenarios specifically for other humans to observe? We call them movies, and books, and TV shows. We've got millions of them. Goop's gelatinous form started vibrating with what Tank was learning to recognize as excitement. Tank, this is revolutionary. You're describing a form of mental stimulation that doesn't require actual experience. The implications for psychological well-being in confined environments could be enormous. That night, Tank decided to test his theory. During recreational time, he found a corner of the common area and started telling Goop the plot of Die Hard. Just the basic story: guy trapped in a building, terrorists take over, he has to save everyone using nothing but his wits and whatever he can find lying around. By the time he got to the part where John McClane is crawling through air vents, a small crowd had gathered. Whispers had drifted over, followed by a couple of the smaller inmates who usually kept to themselves. What happens next? Asked a creature that looked like a cross between a lizard and a filing cabinet. Well, Tank said, getting into the rhythm of storytelling, he's trying to get to the roof to signal for help, but the terrorists are looking for him. And he doesn't have any shoes because he took them off earlier, and now he's walking on broken glass. The crowd made collective sounds of distress and fascination. Does he escape? Whispers asked, her telepathic abilities apparently picking up on the emotional tension of the story. I'm not going to spoil it, Tank said. You'll have to wait until tomorrow to find out. The reaction was immediate and intense. The assembled inmates started protesting, demanding to know what happened next. Tank had to use his construction worker voice to calm them down. Look, that's how this works. You get a little bit at a time, and that's what keeps it interesting. It's called a cliffhanger. That's sadistic, said the lizard filing cabinet thing. Yeah, Tank grinned. Isn't it great? Words spread through the prison faster than a reactor leak. By the next evening, Tank's corner of the common area was packed. Inmates who'd never spoken to each other were sitting side by side, waiting to hear what happened to John McClane. Even some of the guards had drifted over to listen. Tank continued the story, embellishing where necessary and adding details he thought his alien audience would appreciate. When he got to the part where McClane kills the first terrorist and takes his gun, the crowd cheered. When he described the scene where McClane writes, "Now I have a machine gun," ho 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 on a dead terrorist, Captain Boom Boom made explosion noises of appreciation. This John McClane, said Razor, his crystalline form reflecting the common area's lights, he is a warrior. He's just a cop, Tank replied. A regular guy in an impossible situation. Regular guy? Whispers seemed confused. But he's accomplishing extraordinary feats. That's the point, Tank said. In human stories, regular people become heroes when they have to. That's what makes it interesting. Tank finished the first Die Hard over the course of a week, doling out the story in carefully measured segments. By the end, he had an audience of nearly 50 inmates hanging on every word. When John McClane finally defeated Hans Gruber and reunited with his wife, the common area erupted in cheers that could probably be heard 3 decks away. More, demanded Razor. Tell us more stories about this John McClane. Well, Tank said, there are sequels. But first, let me tell you about this other guy named Luke Skywalker. That's when Tank realized he might have accidentally started something bigger than he'd intended. The inmates weren't just entertained, they were transformed. Beings who'd spent years in sullen silence were now debating the motivations of fictional characters. Former enemies were bonding over shared investment in made-up adventures. More importantly, Tank noticed that the general level of violence in the prison was dropping. Hard to start a knife fight when you're worried about missing the next installment of Star Wars. But Tank was also smart enough to know that this couldn't stay underground forever. Sooner or later, Warden Claxon was going to notice that his carefully maintained atmosphere of despair was being disrupted by something as dangerous as hope. He just hoped he could figure out how to handle that conversation before it happened. Tank's underground movie nights had been running for about a month when he realized he'd accidentally created the galaxy's first entertainment addiction epidemic. Inmates were showing up to recreational time early, saving seats for friends, and trading commissary credits for better spots near Tank's storytelling corner. The black market had expanded beyond weapons and contraband food to include story spoilers and plot summaries. This is getting out of hand, Goop observed as they watched a heated argument between 2 inmates about whether Han Solo really shot first. I know, Tank replied, but he was grinning. For the first time since arriving at Pandemonium Station, he felt like he was actually good at something useful. The problem was logistics. Tank's voice was getting hoarse from nightly storytelling sessions. The common area was overcrowded, and different species had started forming factions based on their preferred genres. The action movie fans, led by Razor and Captain Boom Boom, controlled the best seating. The romance enthusiasts, which had somehow attracted a surprising number of the more violent inmates, had claimed a corner where they discussed the relationship dynamics in Casablanca. And the science fiction group, led by Whispers and a collection of the more intellectual prisoners, spent their time debating the plausibility of faster-than-light travel in human fiction. Tank realized he needed to professionalize the operation. Using his construction background, he started planning improvements to their makeshift theater. The challenge was doing it without attracting official attention while also expanding capacity and improving the experience. His first ally was Captain Boom Boom, who turned out to have more skills than just making explosion noises. Boom Boom knows electronics, the former pirate announced. Boom Boom can make better sound system. Ka-pow. Working during their off hours, they managed to salvage parts from the prison's ancient entertainment system. Most of it was broken anyway, so nobody noticed when components started disappearing. Captain Boom Boom rigged up a basic amplification system that meant Tank didn't have to shout to be heard in the back rows. Next, Tank recruited Razor for security. The crystalline gangster had become surprisingly invested in human storytelling, particularly action movies where the protagonist fought impossible odds and won through determination and violence. These human heroes, Razor said, his voice like grinding glass, they remind me of myself before I was captured. You mean violent and prone to property damage? I mean unwilling to surrender in the face of overwhelming opposition. Tank was starting to understand that Razor wasn't just a thug. He was a war criminal, but the philosophical kind who genuinely believed in his cause. The kind of being who'd respond to stories about underdogs fighting the system. Razor, Tank said, how would you feel about making sure nobody disrupts the movie nights? Keep the peace, make sure everyone gets a fair chance to enjoy the stories. Razor's form shifted, light refracting through his crystalline body. You want me to be your enforcer? I want you to be my head of security. There's a difference. What is the difference? Enforcers hurt people to make them obey. Security protects something valuable so everyone can enjoy it. Razor was quiet for a long moment. Yes, he finally said, I will protect the stories. With security handled and sound improved, Tank turned to the next challenge, special effects. Human movies were visual experiences, and he was limited to verbal storytelling. But Captain Boom Boom had an idea. Boom Boom has access to maintenance supplies, he announced. Can make lights flash for explosions. Can make smoke for dramatic effects. Ka-boom. Is that safe? Probably not. Boom. They started small, adding simple lighting effects to action sequences and using harmless smoke for atmosphere during dramatic moments. The audience loved it. Tank watched hardened criminals cheer like children when Captain Boom Boom triggered a series of flashing lights during the Death Star explosion sequence in Star Wars. But the real breakthrough came when Whispers approached Tank with a proposition. I've been thinking about your human stories, she said, her telepathic voice resonating directly in Tank's mind. With permission, I could project visual images from your memories directly into the audience's consciousness. They could actually see these movies instead of just hearing about them. Tank stared at her. You can do that? It's a variation on my con artist skills. Instead of implanting false memories, I'd be sharing real ones. Your memories of watching these movies. Would it hurt? Not at all. It would be like dreaming while awake. They tested it with a small group, Tank narrating Jaws while Whispers projected his memories of watching it. The result was spectacular. The audience experienced the movie almost exactly as Tank remembered it, complete with the suspense, the scares, and the satisfaction of watching a giant shark get blown up. Word spread instantly. Within a week, Tank's movie nights had evolved from storytelling sessions into full sensory experiences. The common area had been transformed into a genuine theater, complete with designated seating sections, basic special effects, and telepathic visual projection. The economic impact was immediate. Inmates started trading shifts to get better time slots for movie attendance. The commissary expanded to include movie snacks, which were just regular nutritional paste shaped into different forms, but somehow tasted better when consumed during an exciting chase scene. Different alien species started bonding over shared movie experiences. Tank watched a group of former enemies debate the merits of The Godfather versus Goodfellas with the passion of film school students. Beings who'd spent years in hostile silence were now planning elaborate discussions about character motivation and plot structure. The violence in the prison had dropped to almost nothing. Hard to maintain a blood feud when you and your enemy are both invested in finding out whether the rebels will successfully destroy the Empire. Tank's favorite development was watching inmates apply movie logic to their own lives. Criminals who'd spent years convinced they were irredeemable villains started seeing themselves as the protagonists of their own stories, complete with character arcs and redemption possibilities. Tank, Goop said one evening after a particularly successful screening of Shawshank Redemption, I think you might have accidentally invented a form of rehabilitation therapy. What do you mean? These stories you share, they provide alternative models for behavior, ways of thinking about choices and consequences that don't involve the usual patterns of criminal thinking. Tank looked around the common area, where inmates were cleaning up after movie night with the care of people maintaining something they valued. Goop, he said, I think we might have accidentally made this place better. Indeed. The question is, how long before the authorities notice? As if summoned by their conversation, the common area's doors hissed open and Warden Claxon stepped in, flanked by a squad of security guards. His compound eyes swept the room, taking in the improvised theater setup, the contentedly socializing inmates, and the distinct lack of the usual recreational time violence. Mr. Rodriguez, Claxon said, his mandibles clicking with unmistakable authority, I believe we need to have a conversation. Tank's first thought when he saw Warden Klaxon standing in the doorway was that he was about to spend the rest of his sentence in solitary confinement. His second thought was that he should probably try to negotiate before they hauled him away. "Warden," Tank said, standing up slowly with his hands visible, "I can explain." "Oh, I'm sure you can, Mr. Rodriguez," Klaxon replied, his compound eyes surveying the transformed common area. "What I'm curious about is why my prison, which has maintained a stable equilibrium of controlled misery for 17 years, suddenly has the lowest violence statistics in the galactic penal system." Tank blinked. "Sir?" "Incident reports are down 93%. Medical emergencies from inmate conflict have decreased to nearly zero. Psychological evaluation scores have improved across all species demographics. Even the food complaints have dropped. Which frankly seems impossible given that we're still serving the same nutritional paste we've always served." Klaxon walked slowly through the common area, his insectoid form moving with predatory precision. The inmates had gone completely silent, watching the interaction like spectators at a gladiatorial match. More interestingly, the warden continued, "Productivity in work details has increased by 47%. Inmates are showing up early for shifts, completing tasks efficiently, and demonstrating unprecedented cooperation with supervisors." "Do you know why I find this concerning, Mr. Rodriguez?" "Because change is bad?" Tank ventured. "Because change without authorization is chaos, and chaos is the opposite of what Pandemonium Station represents." Klaxon stopped directly in front of Tank's improvised storytelling area. "However, I'm not an unreasonable administrator. Before I shut down whatever unauthorized rehabilitation program you've created, I want to understand how it works." Tank realized this was either his chance to save movie night or his last conversation before spending the rest of his sentence in isolation. "Warden, what if I told you that humans have developed a technology that can pacify hostile populations, improve morale, and increase productivity without requiring any additional resources or personnel?" Klaxon's mandibles twitched with what might have been interest. "I would say that sounds too good to be true, which means it's either a lie or you're about to ask for something expensive." "It's not expensive. It's free. We call it entertainment." "Explain." Tank took a deep breath and launched into the most important sales pitch of his life. He explained the concept of storytelling, the psychology of narrative engagement, and how shared fictional experiences could build social cohesion among diverse populations. He described how humans had used movies, books, and television to create cultural common ground between groups that had nothing else in common. "These movies you describe," Klaxon said, "they teach compliance with authority?" "Not exactly," Tank replied carefully. "They teach problem-solving, cooperation, and the value of working toward common goals. Usually by showing characters overcoming challenges through determination and teamwork." "And your fellow inmates have responded positively to this?" "See for yourself." "Goop, tell the warden about movie night." Goop rippled forward, his gelatinous form quivering with nervous energy. "Warden Klaxon, before Tank began sharing human stories, I spent my days contemplating the existential meaninglessness of my imprisonment. Now I have something to look forward to each evening. I've learned about concepts like heroism, sacrifice, and redemption that were previously outside my philosophical framework." "Razor," Tank called out, "what do you think about the movie nights?" The crystalline gangster moved forward with surprising grace. "Warden, I came to this station expecting to die forgotten. Tank's stories have shown me that even in the darkest circumstances, beings can choose to be heroes rather than victims. It has given me a reason to behave with honor." Klaxon looked around the room at the assembled inmates, all of whom were nodding or making sounds of agreement. Tank could practically see the warden's administrative mind working through the implications. "Mr. Rodriguez," Klaxon said finally, "I want to observe one of these movie nights personally." That evening, Tank found himself in the surreal position of performing Raiders of the Lost Ark for an audience that included the warden and half the prison's security staff. Whispers provided her usual telepathic projection service, Captain Boom Boom handled sound effects, and Razor maintained order with the efficiency of a professional bouncer. Tank watched Klaxon's reaction carefully throughout the movie. The warden remained motionless during most of the story, but Tank noticed his mandibles clicking rapidly during the action sequences and his compound eyes widening during the more dramatic moments. When Indiana Jones finally recovered the Ark and dealt with the Nazis, the common area erupted in its usual post-movie cheering. Klaxon observed the celebration with the intensity of a scientist studying a new species. "Mr. Rodriguez," the warden said after the crowd had dispersed, "I want to see your complete catalog of available movies." "My what?" "Your inventory." "How many of these stories do you know?" Tank did some quick mental math. "Well, there are the classics, the action movies, science fiction, horror, comedy, romance, westerns, war movies, superhero films, animated features." He trailed off as he realized the scope of what he was describing. "Thousands," he finally said. "Maybe tens of thousands, if you count television shows and books." Klaxon's compound eyes seemed to light up. "Mr. Rodriguez, I want you to prepare a formal proposal for expanding this program. Include resource requirements, scheduling, logistics, and projected impact on prison operations." "Sir?" "Oh. If this entertainment technology can maintain order while improving productivity, then it represents a significant advancement in correctional methodology. Pandemonium Station could become a model for the entire galactic penal system." Tank stared at the warden. "Are you saying you want to make movie night official?" "I'm saying I want to make it profitable. The Galactic Prison Authority is always looking for innovations that reduce costs while maintaining security. If we can package your entertainment program as a correctional reform initiative, we could license it to other facilities." Over the next several days, Tank found himself in the bizarre position of being Warden Klaxon's unofficial entertainment consultant. They discussed programming schedules, resource allocation, and expansion possibilities. Klaxon had developed a particular fascination with action movies, especially ones where outnumbered protagonists defeated superior forces through intelligence and determination. This John McClane character appears in multiple films, Klaxon observed during one of their planning sessions. "Yeah, it's a franchise. Same character, different situations." "Fascinating. And audiences will repeatedly observe the same character in different scenarios?" "They love it. Familiarity breeds investment." Klaxon made notes on his datapad with the enthusiasm of someone discovering fire. "Mr. Rodriguez, I believe you may have solved the fundamental problem of long-term incarceration. Specifically, how to maintain order and morale in a closed population over extended periods." "Glad to help," Tank said, still trying to process the fact that his life had somehow become a collaboration with his former jailer. "There is, however, one concern," Klaxon continued. "These stories consistently portray authority figures as obstacles to be overcome by protagonists. Is there not a risk that inmates will apply this narrative structure to their own relationship with prison administration?" Tank thought about it carefully. "Warden, the best stories aren't about defeating authority. They're about heroes taking responsibility for protecting something they care about. If the inmates start seeing themselves as the protagonists of their own rehabilitation stories, that's probably exactly what we want." Klaxon's mandibles clicked thoughtfully. "An interesting perspective, Mr. Rodriguez. Very interesting indeed." That night, Tank lay on his bunk reflecting on how dramatically his situation had changed. 6 months ago, he'd been a drunk construction worker facing an impossible sentence. Now he was apparently co-running a prison rehabilitation program with an enthusiastic insectoid administrator who'd started ending staff meetings with quotes from The Godfather. "Tank," Goop said from his corner of the cell, "do you realize what you've accomplished?" "What's that?" "You've taken the galaxy's worst prison and accidentally turned it into the galaxy's most innovative correctional facility. using nothing but stories. Tank smiled in the darkness. Goop, I think we're just getting started. 6 months after Tank's first movie night, Pandemonium Station had become the strangest success story in the history of galactic corrections. What had started as an underground storytelling club had evolved into what the Galactic Prison Authority was now calling the Pandemonium Model. A revolutionary approach to rehabilitation that other facilities were desperately trying to replicate. Tank stood in what used to be the prison's secondary storage bay, now converted into a proper theater complete with tiered seating, professional sound equipment, and a holographic projection system that Captain Boom Boom had somehow assembled from spare parts and what Tank suspected was entirely unauthorized requisition of military hardware. The 1,500-hour screening of The Princess Bride is completely booked, Whispers announced, consulting a datapad with the efficiency of a professional event coordinator. We have a waiting list of 47 inmates plus 12 guards who want to attend off duty. What about the 2100 showing of Aliens? Tank asked. Restricted to maximum security inmates only, Razor replied from his position near the entrance. Warden's orders. Apparently, the last time we showed it to the general population, productivity in the mining division increased by 80%, but the inmates started requesting motion tracker equipment for their work shifts. Tank shook his head in amazement. The transformation had been so gradual that he sometimes forgot how insane the whole situation was. Pandemonium Station, once the galaxy's most feared prison, now had a 3-month waiting list of correctional facilities requesting consultation on implementing their own entertainment programs. Warden Klaxon had become something of a celebrity in administrative circles, but publishing papers on narrative-based behavioral modification and the economic benefits of recreational engagement in closed populations. He'd also developed an unhealthy obsession with action movies, particularly ones involving complex heists or military operations. Mr. Rodriguez, came Klaxon's voice from behind him. We need to discuss tonight's programming. Tank turned to see the warden approaching, flanked by what appeared to be a delegation of official-looking aliens in expensive suits. More inspectors. No. Better, Klaxon's mandibles clicked with satisfaction. Representatives from the Galactic Entertainment Consortium. They want to discuss distribution rights. Tank blinked. Distribution rights to what? To human stories, Mr. Rodriguez. It appears that your species has inadvertently created the galaxy's most valuable intellectual property. These gentlemen are here to negotiate licensing agreements for human movies, books, and television programs. One of the suited aliens stepped forward, extending what might have been a hand. Mr. Rodriguez, I'm executive producer Vex from GSC. We've been monitoring the success of your program here at Pandemonium Station. We're prepared to offer your species exclusive distribution contracts for human entertainment content throughout the galaxy. Tank stared at them. You want to buy our movies? We want to buy the rights to adapt them for galactic audiences. The psychological impact of human storytelling appears to be universal across species. Our preliminary market research suggests that human entertainment could generate trillions of credits in revenue. More importantly, added another executive, it could revolutionize rehabilitation and social control throughout civilized space. Planets with high crime rates could use human entertainment as a pacification tool. Prison systems could reduce security costs. Even military applications are being discussed. Tank felt a chill run down his spine. Military applications? Psychological warfare, troop morale, prisoner interrogation, the executive said casually. Human stories seem to have unprecedented power over alien psychology, very useful for maintaining order among diverse populations. Now hold on, Tank said, his construction worker instincts kicking in when he smelled a bad deal. These stories aren't weapons. They're just entertainment. Warden Klaxon's compound eyes swiveled toward the executives with newfound interest. Gentlemen, I think you may have misunderstood the nature of Mr. Rodriguez's program. The goal here isn't control or pacification. It's rehabilitation through voluntary engagement with positive behavioral models. The distinction is irrelevant, replied executive producer Vex. The practical applications remain the same. Human entertainment content provides an effective method for influencing behavior across multiple species. We're prepared to offer Earth's government substantial compensation for exclusive access to your storytelling database. Tank looked around the theater at his friends, inmates who'd transformed themselves from hardened criminals into a community united by shared stories and common values. Goop was in the front row, preparing for his weekly film analysis discussion group. Captain Boom Boom was testing the sound system for the evening screening. Razor was reviewing the seating chart with the careful attention of someone who genuinely cared about making sure everyone had a good experience. "No," Tank said. "I beg your pardon?" Executive producer Vex seemed genuinely confused. "I said no. You can't have exclusive rights to human stories." "Mr. Rodriguez," Warden Claxon said carefully, "this could be an extremely lucrative opportunity for your species." "Warden, with respect, these stories don't belong to me or to Earth's government or to some entertainment corporation. They belong to everyone who needs them." Tank walked to the center of the theater, addressing both the executives and his fellow inmates. 6 months ago, this place was hell. People were desperate, angry, and hopeless. Now look around. Beings who were enemies are friends. Criminals are choosing to be heroes. The most violent prison in the galaxy has become a place where people actually want to be better than they were. He turned back to the executives. "And you want to turn that into a weapon?" "We want to monetize a valuable resource," executive producer Vex replied stiffly. "Then you're missing the point," Tank said. "The value isn't in controlling people. It's in giving them something to believe in." Goop rippled forward from the front row. Tank is correct. The power of human stories lies in their capacity to inspire voluntary transformation. Any attempt to weaponize them would destroy their essential effectiveness. Whispers nodded agreement, her telepathic voice reaching everyone in the theater simultaneously. "I've spent my career manipulating minds for profit." Tank's approach is the opposite. He shares stories that allow people to choose their own transformation. Even Razor, who'd built his reputation on violence and intimidation, stepped forward. "Executive producer Vex, you speak of control and pacification. But Tank has shown us something more valuable, the possibility of redemption. You cannot purchase that with credits." The executives conferred among themselves in rapid whispers. Finally, executive producer Vex turned back to Tank with obvious frustration. "Mr. Rodriguez, you're walking away from an opportunity to make your species extremely wealthy." "No," Tank replied. "I'm protecting something more valuable than wealth. I'm protecting hope." After the executives left, Tank found himself alone in the theater with Warden Claxon. "Mr. Rodriguez," the warden said finally, "that was either very noble or very foolish." "Probably both," Tank admitted. "But some things are too important to sell." The Galactic Prison Authority has officially approved the expansion of the Pandemonium model to 17 additional facilities. You'll be transferred to a consultation role, helping other prisons implement entertainment-based rehabilitation programs. Tank felt a moment of panic. "Transferred? But I like it here." "I know you do. Which is why I've submitted a formal request to have your sentence commuted to time served, with the option of remaining at Pandemonium Station as a civilian contractor." Tank stared at the warden. "You're offering me a job?" "I'm offering you the chance to continue doing what you're already doing, but with official recognition and appropriate compensation. You've accidentally created the most effective rehabilitation program in galactic history, Mr. Rodriguez. It would be foolish not to make it permanent." 2 weeks later, Tank stood in the theater watching a new inmate, a nervous-looking reptilian who'd been caught smuggling illegal technology, take his first tentative seat in the back row. "First movie night?" Tank asked, settling down beside him. Yeah, the reptilian replied. I heard you show stories about humans. Stories about heroes, Tank corrected. Some of them happen to be human. But that's not really the point. What is the point? Tank looked around the theater, where beings from dozens of species were chatting excitedly about the evening's feature presentation, a double bill of The Shawshank Redemption and Cool Hand Luke. Goop was leading a spirited debate about the nature of institutionalization. Captain Boon Boon was explaining the finer points of prison break methodology to a fascinated audience of former thieves and con artists. Even Warden Klaxon was in attendance, having developed a particular appreciation for movies about underdogs challenging corrupt systems. The point, Tank said to the new inmate, is that everyone deserves a story where they get to be the hero, even if they've forgotten how. As the lights dimmed and the opening credits began, Tank reflected on the strange journey that had brought him here. He'd started as a drunk construction worker who'd made one catastrophically bad decision. Now he was somehow the galaxy's leading expert on rehabilitation through entertainment, running movie nights at what had become the most successful prison in known space. More importantly, he'd learned something about humanity that he'd never realized before. Their greatest export wasn't technology or art or philosophy. It was the simple, revolutionary idea that everyone's story could have a happy ending if they were willing to work for it. The movie began, and Tank settled back to watch 400 former criminals, gangsters, political prisoners, and war criminals lose themselves in a story about hope, friendship, and the power of never giving up. Sometimes, Tank thought, the best way to conquer the galaxy wasn't with weapons or wealth or superior technology. Sometimes all you needed was a good story and the wisdom to share it with anyone who needed to hear that they could still choose to be the hero of their own life. And in the darkness of a converted storage bay on a prison station spinning through the void, surrounded by the galaxy's former outcasts who'd chosen to become something better, Tank Rodriguez smiled and settled in to watch redemption unfold one story at a time.